That is, either with brains or loyalty. It's quite a disaster when there is neither one nor the other. That is, no brains, no loyalty, no matter how bad it is, yes.
Как бы, совсем плохо, да? Дальше
Then the
еще
situation worsened,
ситуация
and everything
усугубилась,
related to teachers,
и все,
everything
что
related to
связано с
teachers.
учителями, все, что связано с учителями,
It
их
became
все
harder and
тяжелее и
harder to
тяжелее
find
стало
them,
находить,
and harder to
все
find the
тяжелее и
students.
тяжелее,
That is,
и
they began
ученики
to come
тоже
across less
реже
and less
стали
often.
попадаться.
And we
Мы с
remember
вами
that,
помним, что
well, even before that, such an
еще до
auxiliary moment
этого
was introduced as
было
writing texts,
вспомогательное
and reading
время
these
как
texts aloud.
написание текстов, ну и чтение этих текстов вслух.
That
Если
is,
до этого
if before
знание
this knowledge was learned by heart,
выучивалось
then
наизусть,
it was transmitted orally.
значит,
Now
и
it is some
передавалось
texts
из
written
уст,
down,
то теперь
and it was possible
это
to read them aloud and
это
so
тексты
on.
записанные, и можно было их читать вслух и так далее.
It made life a
Здорово
lot
облегчило
easier.
жизнь.
But,
Но, собственно
strictly
говоря,
speaking,
было
there was
отхождение
a
от
departure
первоначального
from the original tradition of initiation
процесса
here. Even
еще
further,
дальше.
then, when this caste mixing happened, well,
Затем,
what a
когда
thing
вот это
happened.
случилось
That it
смешение
became
каст,
very difficult to find a teacher and a student.
то, произошла какая вещь, что э, очень тяжело стало находить учителя и ученика,
And
и
often there were such
зачастую
failures, breaks in the transfer of
случались такие
knowledge, and
провалы,
such,
обрывы
indirect
передачи
transfer of
знания,
knowledge through text,
и
became
стала
increasingly
популярна
popular.
нарастающая такая, знаете, опосредованная передача знаний через тексты. Когда
Yes,
вот,
let's say,
скажем,
sometimes to know such very interesting stories,
иногда, знаете,
very
такие очень
different,
интересные
and in
истории, самые
Hinduism they are
разные.
very
И в
common, in
индуизме
Buddhism.
очень они
That here,
распространены,
they
в
say, where
буддизме,
at one time the
что вот,
teacher
мол,
did
те в
not find
свое
a suitable
время
student, well, he knew
учитель
that
не
there,
нашел
say, in 100
подходящего
years,
ученика,
a suitable student
ну,
should
он
be
знал,
born
что,
by
так
the
сказать, в
power
их
of his
истории
providence.
должен родиться подходящий ученик силой своего провидения, и
And so he
поэтому он
wrote the
написал
text.
текст, этот
I
текст
left this
где-то
text somewhere
оставил на
for
хранение или
safekeeping
где-то
or hid it
запрятал,
somewhere, so that later,
чтобы
when this
потом,
student
когда
is
родится
born,
этот
it
ученик,
means that the
значит,
student found this text, began to
приобрел
read
этот
it,
текст,
roughly
начал
speaking,
его
aloud
читать,
and loudly, yes,
грубо говоря,
and in
вслух,
this way
громко,
partially
да,
convey
и
this
таким
interrupted
образом
thread of
отчасти
knowledge.
передать вот эту прерванную ниточку знаний.
Once
Еще раз, не
again,
от хорошей
all this is
жизни
not from a
в свое
good
время,
life,
а по
but
причине
because of the
ну,
utter collapse.
полнейшего развала.
What's
Что
there? Everything
остановилось?
stopped. A complete
Полнейшего
collapse,
развала,
that
то есть
is,
мы с
we see a
вами
situation that began to
видим
come to the
ситуацию,
fore
что
slowly,
на
slowly,
первый план
but not
стали
to name surrogates.
потихонечку
Initiations,
выходить, ну,
but
не
such
называть
auxiliary
суррогаты,
means.
посвящения, но вспомогательные такие
Funds.
средства. Да
Yes,
даже
even
если
if
был
there was a
учитель,
teacher.
ну вот
Well,
представьте
imagine
себе,
teachers.
учителей
There are
все
fewer
меньше,
and fewer
меньше, меньше,
teachers,
а
and there are more and more
неподготовленных
poorly prepared
учеников
students.
все больше и больше.
And it is
И,
clear that the
понятно,
teacher
учитель не
cannot
может
deal
этим
with
заниматься
everyone at the
всем
same time.
одновременно,
So
поэтому
the student had to
какую-то
do some
вспомогательную
auxiliary preliminary
предварительную
work
работу
himself,
ученик
even
должен
if he
был
did not
сделать
have a
сам,
teacher, if he
даже
had never
если
seen one
у
at
этого
all.
учителя, если он вообще никогда не видел.
They
Ну,
just
просто не
couldn't
могли
afford it,
себе
you know.
позволить, понимаете. Вот
These
такие
are the
вот условия.
conditions. Of
Все,
course,
конечно, хотят
everyone wants
личного
a personal
учителя,
teacher.
если мы изучаем
If
там
we study
физику,
physics
хотим,
there,
чтобы нас
we want
Эйнштейн
Einstein to teach the
обучал
theory of
теории
relativity
относительности.
personally. But there
Но у
are
нас
many of
строго
us.
Эйнштейн
Einstein
один.
is one. And then, the
А
main
потом
part of the work
остальную часть
can be
работы
told to
может
you by
вам
a school
школьный
teacher in
учитель
the same way.
точно так же поведать.
Well,
Ну,
as a
в
result,
результате
there is such a
возникает
situation
такая
that such a
ситуация, что
tradition of knowledge
стала
transfer began to
складываться
develop,
такая
that you
традиция
did some
передачи
additional
знаний,
work
что
yourself,
какую-то
studied some text yourself,
дополнительную
did
работу
some preliminary
ты делал
practices,
сам,
and then you were ready to
сам
meet the teacher with the teacher.
изучал какие-то тексты, делал какие-то предварительные практики, ну и затем ты был готов к встрече к учителю, с учителем, и
And the
учитель
teacher
уже
has more,
больше
well, time in essence.
ну, времени по существу. Ну,
Well,
подобно
just like
тому,
that,
знаете, вот
you
такой
know,
пример
here's
иногда
an
в текстах
example.
вы можете
Sometimes in the
прочитать,
texts you
что
can read that knowledge
знания
is like the
подобно
transfer of
передаче
fire from one
огня
campfire
от
to
одного
another.
костра к другому.
Imagine
Представьте, вы
you want
хотите
to receive this
получить вот эту
transfer of
передачу
knowledge.
знаний.
Well,
Тут не
it's not
обязательно
necessary to
требовать, чтобы
require a
пришел
teacher to
учитель,
come,
наломал
break
дров,
firewood,
там,
saw them there,
пилил,
somehow
как-то
folded them there.
сложил,
Well,
там, ну,
did all this auxiliary work. This can be done by the student himself. What should the teacher do? He has to come well and light another source from his source. Yes, that is, and all the auxiliary work, where to collect firewood so that the firewood is dry, can already be done by the student himself. That is, once again I want to say, it's all not from a good life, but from the cruelest necessity. In other words, it is believed that the world is in decline in this respect. And what used to be easily achievable, easily feasible, ceases to work in the present era. That's why if you study, so to speak, the Vedas and yoga, then sooner or later, you will come across the idea that you will not find classical yoga almost anywhere. And all the yoga that has come down to us, it has come through just such detours, through the cult of bhakti. Well, in India, the most prominent representatives are. Who do they have there? What do they call them? Vaishnavas, Shaivites. Here, well, separately, it's like Tantrism goes a little apart in the sense that in the field of Tantrism, you will meet a huge number of completely, well, as if poorly adequate people. But among them hides a very, very high level of really colossal knowledge. That's the same effect, too. And in fact, you are required to do some kind of preliminary preparation of yourself. But before meeting with the teacher. But again, too, as if to what extent do you need a teacher? In other words, the teacher has become a very rare commodity. Therefore, if it was possible to replace it with some auxiliary moments like texts, or some such exercises, where, say, a person who has been studying, say, the same yoga for a long time, begins to voice or read the text to you and thereby, as if it were some kind of a little substitute for the teacher in terms of, well, yes, there is a person, but he still does not quite reach such an absolute guru. But again, it takes a lot of work from the teacher with a capital letter. In other words, such an economical attitude to the transfer of knowledge has arisen, and it is still going on. And, as a matter of fact, to expect that you will find a teacher somewhere with a capital letter, well, to put it mildly, you must have too good karma. It's just extremely good karma that you should immediately face each other like this and that you should be taught, starting from the first steps to the highest initiations there. And that is further. Yes, and that's why it's very interesting. Some of the schools in yoga are curious, that some thoughts. It starts like, like water, a spring dives underground somewhere. Then from somewhere it beats with a fountain or a spring. In the same way, sometimes it is very difficult to find a backstory, background, where, what school, and so on and so forth. Therefore, well, such a purely practical attitude to this whole thing is that if you are interested in higher knowledge, then there is no time to lose. We need to start working right now with what we have, in the hope that you will prepare yourself for a meeting with teachers. Anyway, when it became, well, open yoga as such a phenomenon, it is very old. It actually began when yoga began to penetrate into the West. And it was a very open question, but how, to what extent? Because what has more or less developed and worked in India ceases to work in the West. It's a little different here. Vivekananda wrote a lot about it, said a lot of things. And this is the concept of open yoga. It consists in starting with what is already there. Don't wait, don't waste time. If there are any texts, start studying them. Start studying them with these methods of reading aloud, composing, well, as if by correspondence to yourself this text. In other words, rewrite it by hand. Let you have your personal handwritten version. Yes, it will take a lot of time, a lot of effort, but the effect is enormous. Then, if you know that there is some kind of party somewhere, well, I apologize for the slang or some kind. A group of like-minded people who are a little further than you have advanced. It is highly desirable to communicate with them. Physical contact. And again, all these texts, all these narratives, all these things, even if these people, well, as it seems to you, clearly do not pull on a teacher, but it's still better than studying alone. Here there is also such an effect of studying with like-minded people, even if like-minded people do not surpass you, much faster, much more effective than teaching alone. In other words, it is necessary to combine personal practice with personal training, with coeducation. Then, if someone thinks at least something more than the average student, it is necessary to learn from him from time to time. And the most effective thing is to visit the places where this person happens. That is, it's like you know such a teacher, well, like an intermediate teacher or something. Yes, that is, he doesn't seem to pull an absolute guru, because, well, this is too high a level, but such an intermediate level. He is extremely useful, and it is the physical presence with such a person that is secretly useful. Quite magically, the speed of your learning will dramatically increase. You are more and more ready to meet a real teacher, and there is a high probability that you will meet him, and if you do, here I want to draw your attention, you will recognize him. Unfortunately, there is also such a problem in the texts, and in the yoga of Diksha. You meet your teacher, but you don't recognize him. A million stories in the East, in Tibet, in India. I especially like, you know, in Tantric Buddhism, there are so-called 6 ikas on the horns. It is very instructive how he looked for his teacher on Ropa, how he presented himself to him in one form, then in another, and he did not recognize him. Such a beautiful story, they love to tell everything. She really will reveal a little bit of the Eastern mentality to you. Because we are Westerners, we have two extremes. Either such nihilism is complete. We can't understand at all what these Hindus were thinking up there. Then we start believing any nonsense. We start, as it were, blindly copying everything that can be. That's why this is the moment when you may have met your teacher with a capital letter. And sometimes it's not even just with a capital letter, but a teacher who, well, is like the next step in your life. And you don't recognize him. Are you either waiting at all for someone from heaven to come to you on a heavenly chariot, and that means it will fly, right? Here? Well, that is, here is such a thing, often such a thing, that here is a Western man, he's waiting for everything. He's going to start reading these magic books there. Everyone is waiting for this to be his case. And you be prepared that your case is the following, as it means in that same, in other stories, where your teacher died 100 years ago. Because you were not inclined to learn from him 100 years ago. And your teacher knew that you would be born in 100 years, left you a text. You were born, so let's go through the text. There is no need to drive teachers in vain. So it's empty, right? Here. So start with what you have. This is the basic idea. So, in general, once again, there is no more contradictory concept than the concept of a teacher. In everything related to Veda and Yoga, I'll explain why now. You have to be very clear about this. On the one hand, according to the theory of Vet, the basic law of the universe is Rita's law, the law of freedom. Or in other words, strictly speaking, you don't need anyone at all. You are self-sufficient. Just as the Absolute does not need anyone. Because you are made in the image and likeness of the Absolute. And in general, strictly speaking, your higher self with your abilities is no different from the higher self of any teacher, any rishi, any yogi or ajini. You know, different formulations of this law are proclaimed. One of them sounds like Tatsu Asi. You are that. In other words, it turns out such a very curious thing that in general, strictly speaking, if you settle on a desert island and say, "Come on, let's enlighten yourself here, alone," then there are no fundamental restrictions, so that you do not rediscover everything that was known before you by all the rishis, do not reach the highest state, and therefore do not receive everything that is written about, means, or what is proclaimed in the Vedas. This is the cruelest situation. Moreover, if you depart from this position, then you are not a man, you are an obscurantist, you are a slave yourself, and impose slavery on others. Because even he absolutely does not climb with offers of his services until you contact him. And if some system suddenly rests extremely strongly on the presence of a teacher, then it turns out a little bit of such a sediment. And why the third extra? The Absolute does not climb. You don't seem to want to. And then some Four showed up, who says that you can't live without him. It's not working out well. And where is the state of Slomasi? And where are all these principles? So you should understand this quite clearly. On the other hand, in all these texts, the ancient heritage, there will be the same thought, that strive with all your might to find your teacher. And if you have found your teacher, serve him there, follow all his instructions, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Literally reading his thoughts in advance and means how I know. Find a teacher, come to his house, serve him there, and so on, so on. These are, you know, formulations that have been established there since ancient times. That is, it seems because without a teacher it will be very bad for you and well, quite. And how can this contradiction be resolved? That on the one hand, it seems like we don't need a teacher, but on the other hand, you can't take a step without a teacher. So, well, from a formal point of view, this was done by, well, different branches of thought, Indian and Yoga, and such a strain in Yoga as Advaita Vedanta Yoga. We've been thinking about it a lot. The formal answer is that, in fact, the teacher means nothing more or less to you than the Absolute, who in his mercy came into this world in the form of a person. That's your cool karma. You have earned by some previous exploits in previous lives that in this life, the Absolute itself came in the form of a person and begins to teach you. Why? Well, because he called. Yes, but on top of that, you still recognized him. So you admitted that he is your teacher. And it's not like someone, you know, is running around India or there in Europe now, that is, chasing students. He's such aggressive marketing there, and stuff, yeah. Here. No, it is you who recognize in another person that it is nothing less than the Absolute that has come to you. Because all the third ones are superfluous. If, again, according to Advaita Vedanta, you can focus not on absolutely, but on your higher self. Then again Tat Slamasi. You are that. You should perceive your teacher as your own soul, or as your own Atman, which means manifested in a person, or this person, as a mirror, in which you see a reflection of yourself.
Или этого человека как зеркало, в котором ты видишь отражение себя.
That is, here you suddenly saw yourself in another. That means it is clear that there are different more beautiful forms of this attitude.
Красивые формы вот такого отношения.
Well, in particular, let's say that in Tantrism there is often such a concept that here you are a husband, you have a wife, and to see his teacher in his wife. To think that your wife is the Absolute, which is the goddess herself, who in her mercy came into this world, to pull you out of bad karma. Here he deserved to see something. Well, or the reverse situation, when a wife considers her husband to be the Absolute himself. It got quite an interesting sequel. According to the Indians themselves, and some observing Europeans, Indian families are very happy. For the simple reason that little girls, and since childhood, as it were, are inspired that her husband is God himself, who came to her in the form of a man. And she cannot go to the temple, she cannot do any practices. Why? Yes, she is with God every second, as they say. Here. And this is what it is, you know, in the future, well, as it were, it is very much present in Tantrism. Or else there is such a thing in the same Tantrism. Consider that your children are your teachers. That's how the daughter, then, of this king of the Himalayan mountains. This is the situation. It means that the king of the Himalayan mountains was Himavada, yes, and now he also distinguished himself with some merits. Which means that the Absolute itself in the form of a great goddess was born in his family in order to facilitate his knowledge. So, well, some kind of teacher, yes. That is, and as you can see, there should be the following. You have to accept, that is, this teacher, you have to recognize him, and so on. If for some reason there is no such situation, then you are looking for any cute, so a representative of yoga, well, firm which you are not sick. Well, in that sense, because, you know, it happens, I myself know how hard it can be. This is the emotional component. If you don't like a person for something, you can't learn from him. Moreover, you can't learn from him such unspeakable transcendental things. Therefore, this is also a very unambiguous advice. In other words, no one will help you with this. Whoever told you that there is a great teacher somewhere, if you came and well, it didn't go well with you, then maybe it's not your teacher. Not necessarily the highest teacher, you know, intermediate, as you know, there is a guru, there is a guru. How would that translate? Okay, let's not do it now. Be smart. Yes. Almost a guru. Yes. Near the guru. Or as a paramedic, yes, there are doctors, there are paramedics, yes. A medic generally treats you, and a couple of medics help a medic treat you. That's why the question is the following. If you don't have such a personal, well, sympathy, openness, then you don't need to force yourself too much. First of all, time may pass, now he is not cute, tomorrow he will be cute, yes. Because we still don't understand a lot of things. Sometimes, because of our bestiality, we seem to expect others to behave the same way, but they somehow behave differently, it annoys us. Here, or vice versa, there are often other stories. Here again, I like Tantric Buddhism in this respect. There are enough, frank stories there that, generally speaking, a guru among the local population there, where he lives there, is generally considered a drunkard and a rowdy. Like you're going to him, right? Here. Well, that is, there are so many all sorts of things like that sometimes. Something does not correspond to your idea, yes, about everything higher. Moreover, both the highest such teacher and the intermediate teacher. And finally, a few words about today's time. Now you see, somehow it turns out beautifully that we need a source of teaching. We need carriers of teaching, living people. If there are none, starting with written sources, if there is someone somewhere who started working with these written sources before you, and you like him, start communicating with him, practicing together, listening to him, and so on, and so on. So it means, and now look as if earlier all the texts were memorized by heart, they could be heard, now, With the advent of YouTube, actually, the text is not needed. This is a big problem today. People start reading slowly, lose reading skills. Why? I turned on the button, and here they are broadcasting, as if it means the guru himself was broadcasting to you. And the question remains open. And how much does yoga work when, let's say, the guru reads the text, but only in the broadcast? And again, if we give an example of numerous such branches of yoga, very often I now come across that, they say, there is some kind of Shivaratri holiday, and it was decided by the world to celebrate it. To do this, you need to connect to the YouTube channel and watch the broadcast. And that means some good will fall, right? And it really works. The question is different to what extent. The question is actually a very interesting question, very open. Especially in open yoga, we are faced with this, to what extent it works, as if this communication is not with a guru, no, but with those who know more than you, but only via the internet. The fact that when it works live, it is, as they say, documented and verified by 1,000 years in general history. Because for the last thousands of years in the field of knowledge transfer, everything is not as good as it would have been. In any case, we know the word yoga, at least we are talking about something here, which in itself is pleasant. So at least something got through, right? But how much will it be transmitted if it is still over the internet? That is, if you will be over the internet. According to our feelings, since open yoga may be one of the first who started experimenting with the internet. I remember at one time how many there were, that's literally hissed all such orthodox. Yes, what are you? Yes, is it possible to trivialize yoga with the internet? Then how can you, yes? So, experience shows that it works, but much weaker than physical communication. Moreover, there is some kind of algorithm that if, as it is now, according to the roughest estimates, if at least twice a year you somehow do not intersect with like-minded people, and there you do not hear any lectures live, or someone reads texts live in front of you, or you just practice together, then the effect decreases dramatically. We compare it with beriberi. Yes, that there is food usually, there are vitamins, if there are very few vitamins needed, but if there are none, then ordinary food becomes generally useless. A person can even die in the presence of food. That's exactly the same live communication, it's like a vitamin that needs to be added to food from time to time. If you eat semi-finished products there's stewed meat from cans, yes there. It's like it's really Vedic, yes, stewed meat. Okay, not stewed meat, yes, you eat some kind of Chinese noodles there, which means that they are quickly soluble.
растворимой,
Well, hoo-hoo then,
то
yes,
чем, да,
vegetarian.
вегетарианское, но если
But
там
if
нету
some trace
совсем
elements or
каких-то
vitamins are not present
или
there,
какие-то
then
витамины,
serious health problems
то
begin,
начинаются
and
серьезные
sometimes
проблемы
they
со
end very
здоровьем, а
badly.
иногда они заканчиваются очень плохо,
This
так
is
что
also where
здесь
the
начинаются
problems with
проблемы с
studying yoga
печенью,
begin,
легкие, а иногда
and
человек просто
sometimes a person
бросает.
just quits. Because,
Потому
you
как,
know,
знаете,
this
вот
is a
этот
delicate
круг
balance
равновесия
between his
между
negative
его
karma to get
отрицательной
this
кармой,
knowledge and negative karma with negative
чьих-то знаний
tendencies
и
that
негативная
take him
карма
away for
негативными
some other things,
тенденциями, которые
thoughts, and
уводят
so
его
on.
прочь по каким-то другим делам, мыслям и так далее,
Here it
оно
sometimes
иногда
teeters on the
балансирует на
edge,
грани.
and if it is
И
not
если его не
lifted,
поднять, на
everything is held
ниточке,
on a
все
thread by
держится
a
на
thread.
ниточке,
But
но
even if a
если
person does
человек не
not support it,
поддерживает
he
это,
is
то
carried away.
его уносит, к сожалению, тут
Unfortunately,
тоже
there
есть
are
такая
also
же
the same statistics and
статистика,
observations, well, purely such, you
людей,
know,
ну, чисто такие,
empirical,
знаете,
as they would say.
эмпирические, как бы сказать,
Conclusions.
а, выводы. А,
So
Значит,
now we're moving on.
теперь дальше мы идем,
Then we go. There is a
параллельно
parallel between modern
идет
science, modern education,
современная
and the same
наука с
ideology
современным
of Yoga
обучением
Diksha.
и той же самой идеологией йоги Дикши.
In
На
fact,
самом
here is
деле,
an exact
вот
copy.
точная
If you
копия,
say, study mathematics, physics,
если вы,
well, some
скажем,
exact
изучаете
serious sciences.
математику, физику, ну какие-то точные серьезные науки, а,
What at
что в
school,
школе,
what at
что
the
в
institute,
институте, что
what
потом
later
в
in
жизни.
life. If you
Если
have
у
good
вас
karma, and you meet a
благая
person
карма, и
who
вы
lives by
встречаете
it,
человека,
you
который
involuntarily,
живет
first of all,
этим,
begin to love this
вы
subject.
невольно,
And
во-первых,
secondly, it is
начинаете
very
любить
easy
этот
for
предмет,
you.
во-вторых, он вам очень просто дается.
If
Если
you,
вы,
well, first of
ну,
all,
как бы,
reach
во-первых,
out to him with
сильно
all your
тянетесь
might,
к нему,
read
читаете
books there,
книги,
listen
там,
to
слушаете
recordings.
записи,
But the main
но
thing is
главное
that from
время от
time to
времени
time, you physically
физически
attend a lecture
присутствуйте на
there.
лекции,
Why?
вот еще
There
и
is also a
составляющая
component
невербального
of
знания,
nonverbal knowledge that dramatically
которая
accelerates your
резко
progress.
ускоряет ваш прогресс.
This
Это
applies
касается
to foreign
иностранных
languages.
языков.
It's
Это
about
касается
business.
бизнеса.
You
Ну,
know,
знаете,
there are
есть
businessmen
бизнесмены
who are contagious
заразные,
in a
в
good
хорошем
sense of the
смысле
word.
слова.
Everyone
Все
in their
остальные
environment also
окружение тоже
becomes
становятся
successful
успешными
businessmen.
бизнесменами.
There are
Есть же
people on the
наоборот люди,
contrary, I won't name
не
them.
буду их называть,
Yes, in
да, в
general,
общем,
such,
такие, ну,
well,
как бы,
as you
знаете, есть такое
know, there
слово
is such an
английское
English
лузеры,
word
да, но
losers,
как
yes,
бы в
but
таком
as if in
обычно в
this. It
негативном
is usually in a negative
оборачивании.
way, that is, losers. Here,
Вот,
he himself is
он
not
сам
with him
не слава
forever,
Богу
thank God.
вечно. И
And
все, кто с
everyone
ним
who contacts
связывается, это
him
вот
is
ждите
waiting for
проблем,
problems,
ждете
that
проблемы,
everyone
как
around him will
у
have these
всех
problems,
окружающих,
right?
да?
That's
Это
how contagious it
заразно.
is.
Э,
And this effect,
И
of course, it is,
вот этот
well,
эффект,
if you look at
безусловно,
it from a
он как бы
materialistic
вот если
point
с
of view,
материалистической
then
точки
it seems
зрения
to
на
make
него
no
смотреть, ну,
difference.
вроде бы какая
Yes,
разница, да?
well,
Но мы
we don't
много
know a
очень
lot
не
of
знаем, а
things,
если уж говорить
and
о том,
if we say
что,
that
вот,
we
не
don't
знаю,
know a good
духовные
part of the
там
universe there, which escapes
части
our monkey
Вселенной,
mind,
которая
then
ускользает от
there is
нашего
no need to be
обезьяньего
surprised.
разума, то тут удивляться не приходится,
And
и
so this
поэтому
is the
вот
most
такое
severe requirement
жесточайшее
to look
требование
for
к
a teacher in
ищите
yoga.
учителя в
It
йоге.
was, is, and will be relevant,
Оно
despite
было,
the
есть и
fact
будет
that you
актуально,
can sort of
несмотря на то,
rediscover
что
everything
вы
yourself.
можете сами все вроде как и переоткрыть.
But even
Но
if
даже
you
если вы
rediscover
что-то
something, it's
переоткрываете,
much easier to follow in the
какая-то лекция,
footsteps of someone who
цитата
was already ahead
по
of you.
следам того, кто уже впереди вас был,
It saves a
здорово,
lot
что
of
оно
time
такое
and effort.
усилие.
Yes,
Э,
it is absolutely
Да,
curious
совершенно
now
верно.
that I have
Любопытно
begun to
сейчас, вот
observe
есть
a
стандартное
phenomenon. It
объявление,
is
но
absolutely
совершенно
curious.
любопытно. Вы
Well, you
знаете,
know,
да, что
yes, that
математика —
mathematics is
это
the engine,
двигатель,
the
основа
basis of
прогресса,
progress. That
что
mathematics is
математика
actually
фактически
changing our everyday
сменяет
life,
нашу повседневную
penetrating into
жизнь,
the natural
проникая в
sciences, into
естественные
all
науки, во все
sciences.
науки,
And
и
after
из-за
that,
этого у нас
we have
прогресс,
progress, the production of food, clothing,
производство
everything
питания,
is in general,
одежды и
a
всего-всего. Это, в
consequence of
общем-то,
mathematics.
следствие от математики. Сперва
Mathematics comes
возникает
first,
математика, а
and then
потом уже все
everything else.
остальное.
Well,
Ну и
now you
сейчас
see
вы
that
видите
applied mathematics, which is called it or
прикладная
computer
математика,
science,
которая
is
называется
sometimes
IT
called
или
in the
computer
West.
science иногда
Then
называется
everything
на
related
Западе,
to
то есть все, что
computers
связано
is in general.
с компьютерами,
Numerical
это,
methods
в общем-то,
mathematically implemented with the help of all these
численные
mechanisms.
методы математические, реализованные с помощью вот этих всех механизмов.
And
И
how
как
quickly the world is
быстро
changing.
меняется
That is,
мир.
now
То есть
mathematics
сейчас
has really
математика
taken over our lives.
за нашу жизнь взялась по-настоящему.
And there is an
И
acute
острая
shortage of
нехватка в
programmers.
программистах.
Acute
Сильнейшая
shortage.
нехватка.
The fact
Дело
is
в том,
that,
что,
well, I don't know,
ну,
if
да,
someone in the
безусловно, в
future will
будущем
watch
будем
us,
смотреть,
maybe something will
все
change there in the
поменяется
beautiful distant
в
means.
прекрасном далеком, значит.
But now the trend is simply terrifying, the hunt for programmers. And it is very difficult, oddly enough, to educate a programmer, oddly enough. That is, vacancies are open, salaries are simply astronomical. And applicants seem to come with formal knowledge of programming, they are not suitable. If they work for a month, they are fired. There's something missing in them. That's what's missing, and that's it. Here's the classic one, as you know, from books, as you know, in a good way. That the programmer there started there with some binary system, further. Yes, that's all, it doesn't work. And this method has proven itself perfectly, it is a little on the verge. I understand him perfectly. You know, I would call it this, the dorm room method. Here you have a large dormitory, where it's like a big beehive, like a big family, everyone is there with each other. And if it is necessary to pass there or do some work, it is clear that someone is doing it, someone is a freeloader, and he asks, well, explain it to me quickly. And here is such an interaction, you know, such an interpersonal one, where there is not even a special teaching structure. So it works with a bang. And now there are numerous experiments, all sorts of schools are being opened, where an attempt is being made to transform. Well, again, how does a student study in a dorm? He can be there, I don't know, do nothing for a week, and then study for a week, day and night. In other words, this is not formalized, but there should always be someone who knows his subject better. That is, as an apprentice, he runs around and gets up to speed very quickly. Right now it's purely such, you know, even a business model, a business scheme, but it confirms this ideology quite well. If you want to study something, look for a person who understands this, who is nice to you, and communicate with him as much as possible in an informal setting, as if to help him there, do something, be there on the pickup. And it will reach you faster and faster, you can already become independent. Here. Well, the situation is similar, oddly enough, in science. This is what in science is once again called scientific schools. In medicine, in politics, in everything, in business, and so on, and so on. Therefore, this is the ideology of Yoga Diksha, it is vital. Especially for those who are taking their first steps in such a complex field as yoga, so as not to fall into two extremes. The first is to deny, as it were, and the second is to fall under the influence of, well, numerous semi-religious organizations of all kinds. Well, Hindus generally like religions, to be honest. And there, of course, even the term Diksha itself often carries such, you know, a religious connotation. That right now these same people will initiate you into the members of some religious brotherhood. Like, if you don't pass this rite, you're finished, you won't achieve anything, and so on. They bend the stick a little in the other direction. And, well, to be honest, it scares Western people away that some people think that everyone will be happy to reproduce Little India in Western countries, but experience shows that this does not work. It's not. This can really work in some cases. Again, where more emphasis is placed on sensuality, on bhakti. But you remember, yoga is not only sensuality, it's not only devotion, but also some skills, it's also brains. It's also strict adherence to the basic principle of VET, namely Rita's law, the law of freedom. Wherever, in one way or another, freedom begins to be somehow, you know, imperceptibly substituted for. And here you are here to receive an initiation, but you have to do this, that, the 5th, the 10th. Well, the question arises, if the Absolute itself does not require this, what right does someone else have to be? Then it means an intermediary, yes. Well, on the other hand, the reverse situation. No matter how it looks, sometimes some really organizations or these look like outright sects, and you start to dig deep. There is very high knowledge. Very. Well, formally, you know how in India they decided not to destroy. Therefore, this personal factor, the factor of your inner intuition, which will tell you this is mine, this is not mine. It is defining. Defining. And here no one will help there. Even if your wife or husband is there, they say, oh, this is it. If it doesn't suit you, well, it doesn't. And don't try to rape anyone. That they usually like to drive us all into something. Well, in general, you can talk about it for a long time, but such a dry residue, which we must understand with you, is the following. Don't waste a second, work on yourself, sharpen your mind. If you don't have a teacher, start learning something from books, well, an internet site. If you like someone, how he teaches there, conducts classes, then strive to learn from him. If suddenly there are no such people, a party that you would like, create your own party. Here. And well, as if the main thing is not to waste time, the main thing is not to lose this aspiration. And you know, I want to conclude this lecture with the following statement, widely spread in the East: the student is ready. The teacher is ready. In other words, the first step should always be taken by the student. Otherwise, there will be a violation of the free will of the disciple if suddenly a guru from the Himalayas comes and begins to impose something on you. Well, it's a completely different situation when you yourself called the teacher and said, "Oh, yes, I'm so lazy, but I'm so stupid. I need some kind of, such an overseer supervisor. I call him myself. Let him help me fight my bestiality." But if you ask for it for a long time, then it is clear that sooner or later your requests will be fulfilled, and you will get to a place where you will actually be brought to your senses by demands for the simple reason that you yourself have expressed your will to be demanded of you. This is a completely different side. Therefore, in some yoga schools, if you get there, they will demand or ask you in full, but actually, well, what have you come for? And so on, yes, that is, and as a rule, everyone remembers with a kind word. Exactly those moments when someone demanded something from them. That's when teachers literally demanded, and you will remember these teachers all your life. You are theirs. Thank you. Here I am with all my teachers, who demanded, let's say, from me, and it doesn't matter where, in what field. There's yoga, business, science. I remember them. On the contrary, they are so pseudo-cute, nothing needs to be done, it is necessary to show bestiality. So you won't even remember them, and the worst thing is that you will remember with an unkind word that in childhood say, when it was necessary to teach one or another section, yes, you didn't teach. Why, that kind teacher got caught. Oh, you don't have to. Now, not knowledge is, in general, slavery. So, well, let's go, then I remind you of all the information of the OpenYogaClass.com free online yoga courses, including this section. And yes, well, and if you want to study yoga teacher again, then ExperienceYogaClass.com, where there is a free internet yoga course, as well as teacher training courses. That's it, let's wrap this up. Hooray! With Mikhail Kolesnikov, we are conducting a seminar on the Vishuddha Chakra. All information is on the website of Open Yoga, less than Earl greater than. This is the third part of the seminar. We have done some nice exercises to get from the rough to the subtle to work with the Vishuddha Chakra. What is good about yoga? It is good for its practicality. There is a very sophisticated theory here, quite complex. Continuously goes into practice. Moreover, the structure of your body. We remember that in this respect, yoga is a very interesting science. On the one hand, yoga theory, is like for a mathematician. I carry everything with me. A piece of paper and a pencil. On the other hand, practice is, like a laboratory for a physicist. The lab is always with you. And therefore, any theory, it is interesting in yoga, strictly speaking, in one sense. And can you apply it in your life somehow or not? Here. Therefore, these exercises from the rough to the subtle, what did we do? You and I, one way or another, affected the area at the base of the throat. And as a result, of course, first of all, they focused attention on this place. That is, and the very concentration of attention already makes you pay attention, well, as if to comprehend the device. If all this is also connected with the presence of a partner who, as in a mirror, reflects all our internal processes, then, well, as if the result can be achieved much faster. This is the logic here. Friends, the universe doesn't like egoists. She doesn't like egoists. And yoga even more so does not like egoists. It is clear that at first we are, as they say, herd animals, we do like everyone else. Then there comes a period when we begin to isolate ourselves from society for some spiritual purposes of our own. We begin to explore our inner world, and the environment of other people seems to be alien to us. But if everything goes right, then a period of loneliness passes, and you begin to feel inside yourself the desire to communicate and practice with your own kind. And as practice shows, this third stage on the path in yoga is the fastest. Because you see all your strengths and weaknesses in a mirror. As in a mirror, you can feel better, clearer and faster some subtle nuances, which we may have only guessed, but which eluded you. Here. Therefore, here are all the paired practices. They are extremely effective. But once again, they have the disadvantage that you have to have a pair. Well, it still needs to be done with someone. Here. So, that's wonderful. Maybe there are some questions about our entire seminar today. Let's ask them. Dmitry, Anna Kirsanova. Yeah. Why does a zygote appear when you concentrate on the grid? Well, actually, here's another one. Such a bundle is very interesting already with pranayama yoga, as well as with what is called the circulation of pranas in the body. It is from such sources, again, as Shiva Samhita and so on, that it is known that there are, as it were, private manifestations of prana within us. There are 5 main manifestations of pranas, and 5 auxiliary ones, as described in these texts. And one of the auxiliary manifestations of prana is precisely yawning. That's why in ancient texts, they singled out this, function of ours, right, into a separate kind of prana activity, as if separating it, say, from such an activity as hiccups. Here. And many will find out. It's clear that this thing. Thank you. So it's clear that there is something. That's when we want to sleep, we yawn. That is, there are some processes associated with the Vishuddha chakra. That is, both the process of breathing and the process of transition from one space to another. From the waking space, the space of dreams. Moreover, it is believed that, as we have already said, these pranas, in particular, some of these pranas are responsible for, say, the separation of the gross body from the subtle body. It will be possible to talk about more or less sane details here only after we begin to rediscover those mentions in yoga that are in the texts, but which are not fully understood. Friends, you must remember that we only know the crumbs to know. Most of the yoga, apparently, has not reached us for various reasons. So, any more questions? There is no question. Part-time students do not have in the hall. They ask why it is contagious. Not, well, you know, yes, that it is possible to consider this process purely physiological, what it does in medicine. But there is also an aspect, as it were, that eludes such a simple dissection of a person. And such a factor is, well, really, some kind of common wave of all. Friends, there is such a space for research here. Absolutely. Well, yes, here you can answer as axiomatically. Yawning is contagious because there are no separate pranas. There is a single prana of the absolute. Everything else, yes, extends to similar circles on the surface of the water. So that's wonderful. Let's get back to the theory. So, the principle of space. Here. This is quite an interesting universal principle. We are used to our usual physical space. We have already said that scientists have told us a lot of interesting things about space, that it is curved, that it is rigidly connected with time, and we cannot talk about space without time, and time without space. Here. At the same time, the approach in, say, mathematics is very interesting, you know. There is space in mathematics, too. This means that these spaces are defined purely mathematically, as, say, a set of certain objects with certain properties, and with certain operations that you can do with it. And there can be any space. Let's say the space of all the refrigerators of the globe. Here. Or the space of all people. But this is a purely mathematical abstraction, but I like it more than that, because I feel that sooner or later, we will move on to the fact that we will present the highest teachings of yoga. No longer with images of breaks there, bow loops, and goads there. And sooner or later, we will move on to the mathematical language. In any case, even now it seems to me that it is necessary to make the first attempts to somehow connect the microcosm of a person with, perhaps even completely abstract things that exist in the microcosm of our life. But it's interesting, you know, here's another very interesting idea of modern physicists, that our universe originated from the Big Bang. And it turned out that at some point in time it was roughly counted, there are some billions of years, tens of years. Everything was kind of compressed at one point, and then it started to expand. The so-called concept of the Big Bang intersects well with the concept of pralaya in yoga. And it's very interesting, but in what way is our universe expanding? Even if we approach this issue from a modern, such a scientific point of view. And at what rate it is expanding. This is called, in other words, the inflation of the universe. Expansion, inflating. So, it turns out that the space in our view expands in something where there is no space. Moreover, it is expanding at a fairly high speed. And this speed is greater than the speed of light. The speed of light is now considered by scientists to be the largest known in our universe. I mean, you know, this is a very, very strange concept, a very strange concept. When you start thinking about it, your brain boils involuntarily. At night, you look at the cloudless sky, you see the stars, you think, where is the end of the universe? Mentally, you begin to outline the end, as it were, and then you realize that there is no end. And it somehow becomes very uncomfortable, as if you were turned inside out. Here. Therefore, strictly speaking, we are just used to such a concept as space, once again. We have at least some way of life, our physical space. But at the same time, remember your dreams. And in some dreams, you will see familiar places from the physical world, but in a completely different geometry and sequence. Let's say your apartment, and you will know for sure in a dream that this is your apartment suddenly somehow turns out in a completely incomprehensible way. Moreover, in a dream, there will be an unambiguous kind of logical completeness of one element in relation to another. That is, you will not get lost there. You will understand that I walk around my apartment, but it's kind of weird. But I know where to go. Then you wake up, remember your apartment, and realize that everything is completely different in life there. There's a turn in the other direction, a corridor or something. And how it overlaps one with the other. That is, sooner or later, analyzing, say, your dream with dreams, and with a waking state, where you see, as it were, perceive the same objects or phenomena there, you approach through the yoga of dreams just to the awareness of the Vishuddha chakra. Namely that universal space, where your sleep is a special case, your wakefulness is a special case. Some more universal thing, a universal space, and it's called Akasha. And translated in these texts, it is designated as ether. Well, once again, as we said, like a radio broadcast, that is, a certain space ether. Here, but this is more, well, like an elusive concept of capacity, which is a very complex concept. On the other hand, friends, look, there is such a very interesting bunch for reflection. Yoga teaches us that all objects of the phenomenon in the universe are made of a combination of consciousness and energy. In other words, in fact, the principle of space is some kind of combination of sufficiently subtle energy and sufficiently subtle consciousness, which is in its intersection. It just made the very possibility that something could be, well, that there is a container. And accordingly, as it is said in these texts with which we started, certain abilities or superpowers come. As it was believed in yoga. I'm going to do it again. Let's reread the same thing that we started the seminar with. But I hope that you will perceive these texts a little differently now. Please. Shiva Samhita. Meditation on Vishuddha. The one immediately comprehends all four yogs with their secrets. So, come on. The meditations on Vishuddha are unified and comprehend all four yogs at once with all the secrets. Well, here's the list above there. There is its own Shiva Samhita classification of yogas. In general, there are many different classifications of them. When Ijin concentrates on this secret place, feels anger, all three worlds begin to tremble. We've already discussed this with you, haven't we? That is, if you control the container, you can mix the contents in such a way that it will not seem enough to anyone there. Next, even if the mind of one accidentally concentrates on this place, it ceases to perceive the external world and focuses on the inner world. Here is a very interesting link with over yoga. Because when you listen to music, or when you listen to so-called subtle sounds. Today, we did one of the exercises when you sang mantra and covered your ears with your fingers. And when this polyphony goes on, sometimes very subtle ones suddenly pop up in the background. A subtle sound, like the overflow of something. It seems, that in Tuva there is this throat singing, turning into something that is nothing. In Tibet, this is the very first thing to sing. They either sing very low in this way, or they go into very high ones. By the way, we had a record somewhere, put it so that yes. It is believed that this is the first glimpse. If your mind grasps it, it will be completely absorbed by nada. Because such a comparison in yoga is given that how to catch a deer. By deer is meant the mind. After all, he's so nimble and timid. Jump, 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 and ran. Here. And such an example was given that, well, it's probably historically that if you play the flute, then the deer, attracted by the sound of the flute, comes out of curiosity to listen like this. And it means that yoga works. That is, if you focus on the grid, focus on this inner sound of the music of the spheres, then you fail. And forget about everything in the world. Once again, all music lovers know about it. There are headphones in my ears as everything around disappeared. Here. And again, it says here. That is, in fact, it is very practical. Well, there weren't really these players with headphones then. But no one bothered to plug your fingers and focus on the subtle vibrations you need. Internal vibrations that sound regardless of whether you have a player or not, as the South claims. Next. His body never weakens and remains full of strength for 1,000 years. He becomes as hard as a diamond when Ijin enters such contemplation. Thousands of years are like a minute for him. That is, here again we are approaching to. Well, there's a lot you can say that there's about a diamond and about thousands of years. But let's talk about the time factor. That is, you go to such heights where you are actually not noticed for a while. Just as if you are watching something interesting, you are reading, time is instantaneous. It passes. The following text. Now the following text, so what do we have there? Shat chakra is not Shat chakra, not Ruan. In the throat, there is a lotus called Vishuddha pure. The smoke is purple in color. All the letters shine on 16 crimson petals, clearly introduced to one whose mind is enlightened. At the base of this lotus is a region of ether of a round shape, similar to the full moon. Next one. On a snow-white elephant, Bija Ambari settles here, and his robes are white. Two of his hands hold a noose and a goad, while the other two hold a gesture of blessing and averting fear. And this addition complements its charm. A snow-white deity, a three-eyed Vilakoi, with 10 beautiful hands, dressed in a tiger skin, always sparkles on his lap. His body is connected to that which is born of mountains, Parvati. And he is known by the name of Sada Shiva, always beneficent. Shah Tishakini shines in this lotus, purer than the ocean of nectar. And her robes are yellow in their four. She carries a bow, an arrow, a noose, and a dragonfly on 4 toss-like arms. At the base of this lotus, the entire region of the moon is not stained with the sign of the hare. Well, I'll explain. The sign of the hare is a drawing on the moon. You know, when you go out into the woods, and there are some mountains, there's something lighter, something darker. So, well, I do not know, maybe it is better seen by the Hindu, but for some reason, they saw that it was a lunar hare. Yes, that's the sign of the hare, right. That is, well, the sign of the hare, it means there's something there. Into the craters. Yes. Here is the gateway of the path to great liberation for those who wish to attain the riches of yoga, seek the senses, and whose senses are purified and controlled. Here, pay attention. All the senses are purified and controlled. That is, it is clear that from the list of the 5 senses, this is, as it were, the last one. You control her, you control everything else. But really, I remind you that in other texts, say, such as Ananda Lahari, and the mind is not reduced to feeling. In other words, the goddess Shri is considered so beautiful in this very Ananda Lahara that, compared to her, even the mind is just a sense organ. A sadhaka who has attained the fullness of knowledge of the Atman by constantly concentrating his consciousness on this lotus becomes a great saint, eloquent, wise, and enjoying the inviolable peace of consciousness. He observes the past, the present, and the future, and becomes the benefactor of everything, free from ailments and suffering, long-lived. and, like Hamsa, the destroyer of endless dangers. The Yujin, whose mind is firmly fixed on this lotus, whose breath is controlled by him, has the power to pass through the three worlds. They are Brahmas, and Brahma, a little bit back. That's whose mind is steadily fixed on this lotus. Let's think about it. Ijin, whose mind is steadily fixed on this lotus, is further away. Whose breathing is controlled by Kuaka. Whose breathing is controlled by Kuakai. Has the power to pass. Has the power to pass that. Has the power to pass through three worlds. So look, it's very allegorical here. What is the indication? Absolutely correct. On the pranaya. Here, not Brahma, Vishnu, nor Hari Harari. Hari, ha ha ha. Not Ga. Ga. The Ganapadas are not able to suspend it. Yeah, wonderful. Next. Well, a little bit we are their reception. Come on, Adam gave Hari. From afar. I greet Shiva in your Vishuddha, pure, transparent as crystal, the originator of ether, the liberating world of darkness. And that one goddess with him, who, like birds, Chikori, enjoys the moonbeams emanating from them. So look here, let's say a few words. Such a very interesting, beautiful mythological image of a chicory bird. It is believed that she, well, as such an image, yes, that she feeds on moonbeams. Imagine a bird that feeds on moonbeams. That is, you know, the limit of refinement. And indirectly, look, an indication of the energy of consciousness, the Shiva of consciousness, which means, accordingly, his spouse is myself, well, or in one of the literal translations, a friend, a goddess. And they are one. Do you remember this image of Sadashila? That, as it were, the unity of consciousness and energy, in all its most powerful beauty, is present here. Therefore, any mantra. Well, why is the yoga mantra, or the repetition of certain mantras, so powerful? After all, in fact, now in India, mantra yoga has remained from yoga, friends. How to make a pose, no one knows there. It's better not to ask about philosophy. Otherwise it will get bad. Here. But mantras purr on every corner, and that's it. And smart, and stupid, and all of them. Because in fact, with, well, a situation where yoga began to disappear, when there is simply no one to carry it further. Only the most powerful remains. Here. And that's why they love mantras. Everyone loves mantras very much. And indeed, if the mantra is awakened, then it is a direct entrance between consciousness and energy. It's not clear where your consciousness, clothed in energy, passes one into the other. And so here again, for students of the Open University, especially in early courses, it's just a tough requirement. Repeat mantras out loud as much as possible. As much as possible. But, unfortunately, it doesn't always work out, because relatives and friends usually think that we are completely crazy when we start repeating mantras out loud. Here. That's why we have classes here from time to time already. It's okay here. The bribes are smooth. A madhouse on the road, you know. Few people pay attention. And generally speaking, this is a very, very important factor. Here. Here is the darkness of inner ignorance, and the clouding of the mind, the blind spots of our mind. The blind spots around us are best illuminated with a flash of a mantra. When you start saying it. Of course, you will learn more about this in the course of mantra yoga. But I really like such a poetic expression that a mantra is like a lamp that stands on the threshold of a house at night. It illuminates everything outside the house and everything inside the house. It's the same here. These are the methods of using mantras and, as it were, Vishuddha chakras. And it suddenly imperceptibly takes you to a qualitatively new level of being for you. And if you have such a habit, then the swamp of ordinary life will never swallow you up again, it will only start to suck you in. You will begin to repeat the mantra, and these vibrations, the connection of consciousness with energy instantly, you know. Just like the rays of light destroy darkness, instantly shake off the resemblance from the mind, the veil from the mind. Here, once and everything became clear. Then you are not afraid of any causal schizophrenia. So you are not afraid of any cleaning. Just felt that something went wrong. Opanki. And they started practicing the mantra out loud. This is a purely practical moment of using the Vishuddha chakra, the speech center. And sometimes people ask, my God, well, will anything change if I say something out loud? Or I will be silent in this depression, melancholy, and die. I don't want to turn my tongue, do I? That's the trick, my friends. That's the word reluctance, it's not reluctance. You have already been paralyzed and bombed. You know, you've already had it tied up on the outside, so that later. And when you begin to pronounce, you involuntarily tear the bonds. Therefore, once again, in this regard, the link with the mantra, yoga, is a matter of your survival. There is a set of such practices that you want, you don't want, you have to dial. It's like a bank account. You never know what kind of karma. For a rainy day, let it lie. Practice mantras out loud. He earns a little every day. Engage Vishuddhacha. Then there will be a moment when it's really bad, and you're out of curiosity. Well, everything is really bad. Let me repeat the mantra now. One, another, the third time loudly repeated, when suddenly something began to clear up, when suddenly you realized that your inner world, your inner space, and the outer space of problems are two completely different spaces. In that space, or in bestiality, you feel bad. In general, everything is bad there. Muzzles, as we said today. And then one. Well, yes, the muzzles remained, but not somewhere there. That is, as it were, like this feeling of such purity. It's not for nothing that here is an image with a crystal. Crystal clear. So this is the very image of Shiva, right? That is, as the mantra progresses, you will suddenly begin to realize that your inner space is being cleaned. Well, in this regard, there are the following methods, practices, and quite specific advice recommendations. If you want to clean some place from all the dirt that is there, but it means not physical dirt, but physical, you need to take a menik, yes, and sweep it up, wash it, and so on. But sometimes you go to some place, it's clean, but you still feel the dirt. I've been teaching yoga for a long time, and I know you want a super-duper carved yoga center somehow. Everything rolls, glitters, sparkles, yes. But you feel there is no life here. No. And more than once you crawl into such a pit, but you feel a vibration, that there's something elusive there, right? And here's the question of how to make, in general, a suitable place for yourself anywhere. Of course, with the help of a mantra, the recitation of a mantra, out loud or to myself. And it's really, you know, like a shower that washes away all this mold, all these associative connections. Everything gives thought forms when sticky ones fly there. Everything is washed away. That's why we require students to have a set of pronounced mantras. 108,000, if the mantra has not scored a repetition time. Actually, nothing. It's better not to mess with you at all. You will be crushed at the most inopportune moment, and then we will find out for a long time what's what. This is quite a serious figure, 108,000. Say mantras. But I assure you, those of you who recite 108,000 mantras, you will mark for yourself, your life will begin to change. It's hard to explain logically. That's it. Here we have now opened the department of mantra yoga. That's where everything is. That's where they're going to be explained. Yes, so I'm just for what? That again, this fifth center is involved. By washing it, you are washing everything, everyone else. So wonderful. It's time. And there's no time left, yes. So, then let's do the next thing. I ask for your feedback, as always, on this seminar on the website of the Tochka Open Yoga course, less than Earl greater than. Where our free online yoga courses are, there is a corresponding branch of reviews at seminars. Please write at least something, praise, scold, say that I already knew everything, there or I don't want to know. You remember, right? When they praise it's nice, when they scold purr. In any case, it's good. And the benefit to us, as feedback, is the benefit to others who are interested in this topic, but simply do not know where to look. Believe me, normal yoga, sane, not like in Moscow, all over the world. Oh, how hard it is to find. That without these same, without astronauts, you know, without this whole insane public. Oh, how hard it is. Almost impossible. So the question is so that other people can also find us. This is a question, well, in a certain sense of per. Therefore, if there is an opportunity there on social networks, on the forum, somewhere else on Twitter, tweet a review. Please do it. And in any. Praise is nice, scold even better. I am Vadim Open Yoga. Today, we are considering